Hello, fiber friends. I'm home after spending 5 weeks in Peru. I was able to learn so much about so many things, but for this video, because this is a Jillian Eve video, we're going to focus on the textiles. Before we really get into the video, I want to let you know 2 things. One is that this video is sponsored by Foreo. I had my dry skin absolutely saved by Foreo while I was in Peru, and I will tell you about that in a little bit. I also want you to know that I am on the verge of giving up drinking coffee after visiting Peru. Why would that be? Because isn't Peru a place that grows coffee and has lots of coffee? Well, yes, absolutely it is. And that's why I cannot find any good coffee in the United States anymore.
This is coffee. It smells good. Drink it. Do it. Drink. Faster. You have to chug it. It's the real experience.
That's good. That's really good. I've been trying every single coffee shop in my area, and there's nothing that comes close. I've been absolutely ruined for coffee, and I'm still processing that. So I'm not gonna talk about it. I'm gonna have to move on. Peru is a really special place to be able to go and learn about textiles. And that is because Peru has an unbroken tradition of textiles, especially in the Sacred Valley, the area where I spent most of my time, pretty much all of my time, while I was there in Peru. What does it mean to have an unbroken textile tradition? Historically, through most of human history, people would have learned textiles in their communities from the people older than them. For instance, daughters would learn to spin from their mothers and grandmothers and the people around them, and they would teach their daughters.
That's a weft, I'm ready with a weft this. And for making the design, we need both forks. And so when it's replaced here like this, they replace like this, and
they would teach their daughters or sons, because it wasn't only women who were participating in textile production throughout human history. And that went on until industrialization took the process of creating cloth, creating textiles out of the hands of human people, and started moving all that into factories where it was produced by machines. Peru is one of the few places left in the world where people still learn from their mothers, their grandmothers, the people in their community around them. And so that tradition of these specific particular textiles has been unbroken by industrialization. It really is a precious thing that we still have access to. This is something that should be protected and preserved and respected and supported. And I just feel absolutely privileged that I was able to take part in that. When you travel to high altitudes like we experienced in the Andes, a couple things happen. One is that because there's less oxygen in the atmosphere, your body has to produce more red blood cells so that you can feel like you're not gasping for breath all the time. To do that, your body requires good hydration. The other thing that happens is because the atmosphere is thinner up there, the UV index is higher. In fact, more than once, I woke up to high UV index warning on my phone, even though it was like 50 degrees outside. For this adventure, I did have some fiber friends who were able to join me. I had 2 tour groups. One was the first week or 2 weeks, and then the other was the last 2 week that I was there. So I want to share some of the experiences that I had, some stories, while I show you some footage about the things we learned while we were there in Peru, in the Sacred Valley of the Andes. And we are going to start where all textiles start, at the beginning, which is with the fiber. Let's talk about alpacas. I have to tell you something about alpacas, and that is that they are not snuggle creatures. They have all the floof in the world, but they do not want you to come and smoosh the floof or hug them, or they are from a distance. And I think that the reason is, if they were snuggleable and floofy, they would be too powerful. And that would just cause an imbalance in the universe. And so alpacas are slightly aloof. They do their alpaca things, but it was so much fun to see how, like, they're everywhere. Like, you'd be driving along and someone would have an alpaca walking on the side of the road, and you would go up into the mountains, and not just alpacas, but also llamas or llamas, and there would be ruins, like, from the Inca civilization, and just there'd be some llamas just chilling by these ancient ruins, and that was like a regular thing. It was everywhere. Even on Machu Picchu, there's a bunch of llamas that live there, and they are the keepers of Machu Picchu now, as our guide told us. So it was really cool to just see all these animals everywhere. There were also sheep, which didn't originally exist in Peru. Sheep were brought when the Spanish came and colonized Peru, but the sheep are there, and they're also used along with alpaca for various textiles. One of the hardest things for me was I mean, there's definitely a culture of tourism and a whole industry around tourism, and there are things that tourists like, which are alpacas, and we kind of wish we could smoosh them and snuggle them and hug them and love them forever and call them George. So in Pisac especially, there were a couple people who had a little lamb and an alpaca, and they would walk around the square and come up to all the tourists and ask if you wanted to take a picture with them. And then, of course, you have to pay for the picture. Oh my goodness, they were tugging on my heartstrings, and it was so hard to not just go smoosh the smooshy face of that alpaca. I had to restrain myself. Sometimes I had to be restrained. But it was very interesting to see how the alpacas were just really ubiquitous. They were everywhere. Llama fiber is also used in Peru. It is used for more of the sturdy and durable textiles, like sacks for carrying potatoes and for rope and stuff like that that would be highly durable. Alpaca is incredibly soft, and especially the first shearing of a cria is graded as baby alpaca, and it can be incredibly soft. Really cool to see the animals in their natural home. The alpacas that live at high altitude give the best fiber. They have the best food up there, and they don't have exposure to as many diseases and parasites and stuff, and so the healthiest, best alpacas growing the softest, nicest fiber are at very high altitude in the mountains.
So they usually keep the alpacas at higher altitude and have sheep at lower altitude, because the alpacas, when they come down, get sick and die. They don't have the roughage that they need to eat. They're more prone to getting rice fevers and diseases and sicknesses and stuff like that.
There is an animal that lives up there. It is the ancestor of the alpaca, and it is the vicuña. Vicuña have the most expensive fiber in the world because it is so luxurious. It is incredibly fine. During the Inca Empire, vicuña fiber was reserved only for royalty. And I was able to bring home about 40 grams of vicuña. So I will have a video over on my Patreon about how I am going to work through processing, and it's raw. So I'll work through processing it and spinning it and putting it into a project, because I don't want to let it sit in my stash, because I feel like it would become one of those golden fleeces, haha, it would become one of those kinds of fibers that I feel like I can't use it because it's too good to be used, and I don't really want it to become that. So I am going to work on it. You can check that out over on my Patreon if you're interested. I did bring home a little smooshable alpaca. Her name is Fresa Rosada Alpaca de Pushka, which is pink strawberry alpaca of spindles. She accompanied us on some adventures, and she's a lot of fun. She's a party animal, so you got to watch out for her because she likes to live it up. When the alpacas are sheared, that fiber is then hand spun.
Más me gusta a mí hilar alpaca que oveja.
She likes to spin alpaca more than she likes to spin sheep.
Porque avanza rápido
Because she feels
empieza a
like
jalarse
like it goes
rápido,
faster
solito.
and it just works out prettier for her. But she is from an alpaca raising community, so.
Más sí, tenemos alpaca, quizás por eso también los aprendemos.
She's got so her yarn is spun to the but notice how she's still got her spindle in her right hand, right? So there's not these firm rules about it in all cases. And here we have alpaca and all that. ¿Pueden tocar?
Sí.
Han aprendido a pushkar en su manera, en su país, y ahora están aprendiendo aquí. You are all allowed to laugh at us. Are they interested in seeing your spindle?
It's performance pressure.
Es muy pequeño. Mucho y te casa, mire que yeah. Ajá. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I communicated what was wrong with you.
That was so cool.
The name for spindles in the Andes is a pushka, and then the larger spindles that are used for plying, which we'll talk about in a little bit, those are called kantis. Spinning with a pushka is really interesting because a lot of the spindles that we are used to in the United States are top whirl spindles like those hanging up behind me, but a pushka is a bottom whirl spindle. And yes, I am holding this one upside down because it is holding my microphone. But these are two pushkas that I brought home with me. Actually, I brought a whole bunch of these. These are very special. These are chok-choks. They have a clasped ring, so they make a chok 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 sound while you spin with them.
One of the things that's cool about the gravel is listen, and you will hear that you can hear it as it's slowing down. So these special spindles, not really made anymore. There's one guy who can still make them, and he doesn't really want to do it very much. It is turned from a solid block of wood. So that captive ring is on there. ¿Te gusta este chak-chak? Tipo chak-chak.
Sí.
Antes había, pero ahora casi ya no hay.
Ya no se encuentra este
You don't find
chak-chak.
these anymore.
En las que, por ejemplo, en mi pueblo no encontramos esto, solo encontramos aquellas chocos demasiado.
Just find the regular ones. Yo he mandado a hacer en Caucatambo. Que hay un caballero ahí que todavía lo hace, pero ya no quiere hacer.
No hay, no encuentras en el mercado como.
So you don't find these anymore, so they're very special.
Sí.
Most pushkas that you will see are like this one, which I'm holding upside down because it's holding my microphone. It's a very simple tool. It's made from balsa wood and the shaft is eucalyptus. simple tool, amazing textiles. Like it really, that's something that I took away from my experience, which is that you can create amazing textiles with just a couple sticks. That's it. A story I want to tell you about spinning is something that took place while I was waiting for a train to get back to Ollantaytambo from Aguas Calientes. Aguas Calientes is the town at the base of Machu Picchu. So if you're going to go up to Machu Picchu, you're going to go to Aguas Calientes. And the only way in and out of there is by train. So there are trains for the local people who work there and commute, and then there are trains for the tourists. While I was waiting, the train station was very, very full. And I was there with fiber friends, but I kind of went off on my own over to the side because I was charging my phone. My cell phone was just about dead. I went to the charging station, and it was over on the side where a lot of the locals were waiting for the local commuter train. I was spinning because I was waiting for my phone to charge. What else am I going to do? And I was just sitting there spinning, and I was getting some looks from people, and I found it interesting because if I kind of looked out of the corner of my eye, people were really watching my spindle and watching me spin. But then if I looked at people, they kind of went, like there was a little bit of a surprise on their face. And I don't know for sure, but I think it's because of my blue eyes. Like if my head is down and I'm concentrating, you just see dark hair, right? But when I looked up and people were like, wait, this is a tourist, like what in the gringa is going on here? I think they were surprised to see a tourist actually spinning, which was, that was fun, but they knew what I was doing. And that was the thing that I experienced that was very different. I was spinning, and a woman came over, and she was speaking Spanish. My Spanish is not great, but I was getting by. And so we started having a conversation, and she told me how she used to spin, and she's amazed to see me spinning, and where did I learn, and all of that. And I told her I learned from my friend who is from Chinchero. I asked her if she knew how to spin, and she said she did when she was a little girl, but as she grew up and had a family and things got in the way, it wasn't something she continued doing. So I handed her my spindle, and I was like, go ahead. And she was like, so excited. I could just see it on her face. And I'll get back to that in 1 second. But after a few minutes, her daughter came over, and her daughter was like, oh my gosh, you're spinning? Like what? So the daughter was learning English in school, so she and I were able to have a little bit more of a detailed conversation. I asked if the daughter had learned, and she was like, no, I don't know how. And the mom was like, I don't know well enough to teach her. So I started teaching the little girl how to spin, and it was the briefest of lessons, but basically I had her hold on to the fiber, and I spun the pushka and let the twist build up, and then I showed her how to just gently slide her fingers along the fibers, and watching that twist move into the yarn, that moment where it becomes something because you showed up and took this raw material, this wool, and now it's yarn and it's useful and you can do so many things with it. And just seeing that magic of that moment on the daughter's face, that was really cool. And so I asked her if she would learn from her grandma, and the mom was like, yeah, you can learn. So she was kind of excited about that. And, we said our kind of farewells. Their train was announced, and they went to go get in line. And, I was picking up my phone out of the charging station, and I thought, you know what? I have an extra spindle. So I ran to my backpack. And so I untied her from the pushka that she was on, kind of like this, where I'm holding my microphone. And I took the pushka and I ran over to the little girl and I gave it to her, and she just lit up. She was so excited. And she just kept saying, thank you, thank you. And then she said, I love you. And she gave me this big hug. And I was like, it was just really sweet. That was a really special moment. And I hope that little girl gets to learn from her grandma. I hope that she starts spinning and gets connected with that, because that is her culture. To have a textile tradition that remains unbroken it can't be held by a handful of people. That knowledge needs to be held by many people. It needs to be at a societal level for it to remain unbroken. And I hope that she is able to remain a part of that. And someday tell people that she got her first pushka from a random tourist in the train station at Aguascalientes, because that's pretty funny. One of the most amazing activities that we got to do while we were there in Peru was to have a natural dye workshop in Chinchero at CTTC, which is the Center for Traditional Textiles in Cusco, or of Cusco. The dye day was incredible. They had giant pots of water set up over wood-burning fires. Water acts funny when you boil it and cook it at altitude, so it was really neat to see the whole process.
And so we have like that plants, for example, like with the black fungus, no? We call it Kiusakuchu. Turquoise.
The dye day that we participated in was very interesting because they have reconstructed the process of using natural dyes. When chemical aniline dyes came onto the market, they were convenient, they were easy, color fast, you can get any predictable color that you want, and so they kind of started to replace natural dyes. And that was a chunk of the weaving tradition that was, for a time, not practiced and almost completely lost. But efforts have been made through CTTC to revive and reconstruct what that process was to use these different botanicals that are available, and then also cochineal, which is a bug.
Here is dry and grounded.
So that's dried and grounded?
And dry and grounded, yes.
Oh my gosh.
And here in the cactus is alive. No.
Yes.
Some of these colors we are going to do on Sunday. Okay, Sunday. We get to do that. So that's all the cochineal.
350 kilos per year.
Yeah.
Because we can dye many colors with the cochineal, right? We use a lot quantities of natural dye. We're still beating with the cochineal with the natural dye because there are not many people doing that. Because yarn companies copy these colors, and today they are available similar colors to them. Of course, they are not natural dyes. You know? There is big advantage in natural dye. Healthier, nicer, everything, but it's hard work and expensive.
I wanted to bring some of my own yarn to throw into the pots, but I totally forgot and left it all at home, so I didn't have anything with me. But I was walking around in the market, the artisan market in Pisac, the day before the Natural Dye Day, and I noticed some yarn, and so I inquired about it, but it was acrylic, and I told the vendor I needed some natural yarn, and she was like, and I was like, más pequeño, because the acrylic she had was pretty thick. It would have been great for, like, I don't know, a crocheted beanie or something, but not for weaving. And of course it wouldn't work because it wasn't natural. It needed to be alpaca or wool. But she brought me around and she pulled up some yarn. It was this, and it is wool from sheep. And I was like, yes, that's what I'm looking for. When she found out that I was super excited about yarn like this, suddenly a bunch of yarn started to appear. So I was able to get a couple balls of yarn from her, and it is hand spun. I had 3 of these balls, and I needed to put 2 into skein form so that I could toss them into a dye pot. They weren't going to dye like this. The center wouldn't get the color. It was a little bit of a challenge because I started winding the skein on my elbow. That was not a great idea because it was too much yarn to be wound around my arm. And by the time I was just about done with it, I was barely holding on to the thing. It was kind of a mess. But I did get that one done. However, the other one I wanted to turn into a skein to throw into a dye pot, I didn't have ready yet. So when we were there waiting for them to set up for the dye day to get everything ready, I noticed some women on the far side of the courtyard where we were, they were skeining their yarn. I went running across the grassy area with my ball of yarn. I was like, por favor, aprendo. I'm learning, you know, and so I ran over there and they showed me how to make a figure 8 skein, which I haven't worked with yet, but I know how to make one. And so that was a lot of fun to just sort of have that little impromptu, like, hey, I need to do this thing with yarn. You know how to do it. Can you show me real quick? And I mean, obviously we were at a center for textiles, but I really feel like just like how, you know, everybody has a concept and understands what you're doing when you're spinning and they recognize, oh, that's a pushka and you're spinning, you know, you're going to find people that know how to make a figure 8 skein of yarn if you're in Chinchero, because people know that, because there's a collective knowledge. And that's amazing.
This is what we are gloves. There are, because we can dye many colors. Evita knows that. Yeah, chili. Now these ladies are going to put whatever they like. Hand spun yarn, most of them. Gray, white, over dye. They are going to do over dyeing. Sometimes they dye red, they don't have purple. They are going to put red yarn. And it will come out all kinds of shades. Okay, that's the advantage. I'm going to talk a lot about that hand spun yarn.
You're all working hard and I'm hardly working. No, I mean, I guess. I'm not stripping leaves though.
I believe it though.
Yarn cam.
Go ahead, do the yarn cam.
Okay.
Knitting, I'm highly interested. Renata, tienen que te follow.
Okay.
Follow, tienen que te show. Dat scheepje de kunnen waarderen.
Oh, that was good. How did you get me wet over? Really? I'm over here. I'm like at a wrong angle and you're still getting me wet.
She's right there.
She wasn't.
Me.
It's easy. Especially you just got yourself.
And here are the two skeins of yarn that I threw into the dye pot. So this one, of course, is peach, and then I have a darker green, as well as the natural white color. And I did get another ball of yarn. I purchased this ball of yarn in Chowitiri, which is another weaving community way up in the mountains above Pisac. This one was already dyed, so I didn't get to dye this one. I've always respected natural colors, but I definitely have a deeper respect, I think, for the whole process of natural dye. The way that it took so many people for that day to happen really emphasized how this is something done in community. This is done with other people. This isn't something that someone does on their own. Sure, you could have a little pot of something on the stove, but that didn't make sense. Like the botanicals, it took a lot of them, and to prep all of it, it was a lot of work. And you know, going from one pot of one color to a different pot, and all of the things, the way that the whole thing was orchestrated, it flowed like a symphony. Everybody doing their part. I wonder how many plants there are around me that could give an entire rainbow of colors that like we've forgotten. And we didn't have a CTTC to revive the natural dye processes, you know, wherever, wherever you might be, wherever we've had a broken tradition of textile production. So I have a little bit more of an adventurous spirit, I think, for going out to find botanicals that I can use to dye yarn. And I'm excited to explore that further. That is definitely something that I have brought home with me in my heart to figure it out. I have my collection of 4 natural colors of yarn that when I'm done plying it will be ready for weaving, and I can't wait to do some more backstrap weaving. Oh my gosh. But I think before we get there, we need to go back to talking about plying. This is intended to be used in its natural color. How do I know? Well, I know because the amount of twist that is put into weaving yarn is so high, so much twist, that it actually acts as a resist, and it can't be uniformly dyed. So the dyeing process happens between spinning the singles and plying the yarn. And because this is 2 strands, I know that this is ready to ply, not dye.
Spinning process yarn always is double threads in wear weavings, never a single, never a straight, just a double, no? And so in 2 spindles, we can do enough threads, then put together, then and dye if we want, or just a natural color, no, but double.
Plying is done on a larger spindle. It's called a kanti. Here it is for reference. You can see this is a regular pushka that I'm using to hold my microphone, and then this is a kanti. Check out the diameter difference. Why does it have to be so much bigger? So when you have 2 pushkas full of yarn and you're going to put them together, you get a bigger ball of yarn, right? So you use a bigger spindle for a bigger ball of yarn. Also, the weight of this really makes a difference. I did try plying with one of the pushkas, and that was annoying. It wasn't heavy enough, and I needed it to have more momentum to keep going. So this can have very fine yarn spun, plied with it. And this is something that really got me thinking. One of the experimental archaeology experiments that has been done with some extant spindles, or replicas at least, in some European kind of traditions, like where spindles are found as grave goods and stuff. One of the experiments done is to figure out what kind of yarn people were spinning, and there is an assumption that a larger spindle meant thicker yarn, and a smaller spindle meant thinner yarn. But friends, do you know where I'm going with this? This yarn is as thin as this yarn. It's just that this is plied, and I'm holding it upside down. But basically my point is, if you're plying, it doesn't have to be as strong in its single form because it has a partner. It's doubled up. And I know you aren't supposed to assume something is true for one culture because it was true in a different culture that's different time, different place, you know. And I think it's important for those protocols to exist, but I'm not an archaeologist and I'm not writing academic papers. So I have a little more leeway, and I'm going to say that larger spindles being specifically plying spindles to me is a historically plausible assumption. And yeah, so I wanted to throw that out there. You all can do with that news, that information, as you will. And if you've already thought about that, let me know in the comments. I want to know. I'm sure I'm not the only one.
So she's just gonna double it. She's probably not gonna actually ply it.
It's gonna double the same line.
So she's folding. She's winding this, little bundle, and that's gonna let her
That's fine.
get at both ends. At both ends of the piece of yarn.
So it's gonna be short. Yeah.
Yes. It'll be about half the length because it will be double.
Yeah.
A veces no lo sacas y pones acá para seguir haciendo más grande.
Sí. Esta es la forma en que nosotros hacemos en tu marca. Y ahora esto puedo romperlo. Si se rompe también puedo ya sacarlo. Esto no es para hacer bastante bulto, solo es para hacer
so this is not for
pequeño
making a
nomás.
whole lot, it's for making some, and just some. And so she's like, yeah, I can break it and take it off my hand, and I can do all this other stuff. And one of the double. ¿Lo vas a hacer antes?
Sí.
So she's going to apply it for us.
Tengo que sacar, mire, este dedito que tengo envuelto por el medio.
She has to bring that finger out through the middle,
Y solo
and
pongo
then
esto.
she can put that larger loop on her wrist. And
Ahora,
now she is
esto-
able to wind
esto
a
ya está
double-stranded
listo.
ball from it. ¿Eso no harías bola?
No,
Porque es poquito.
es poquito. Ajá.
Since it's just a little, she's going to apply it right from that thing, right from the bracelet. If it was a larger quantity, she would wind a ball from it. But if she was making a meaningful quantity, she would have spun 2 full spindles, and she would wind the double-stranded ball from that. This is just a simple trick for dealing with short quantities of yarn.
Y pues tendré que sacar nomás. Y acá envolver. Es al revés. Okay.
Is this interesting?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so now she's putting 2 of them together.
Yeah, that is plying, and so then she's putting twist in to do that. She is not going to apply this to a degree of firmness that it would be used if it was warp. Oh look, she's got a broken thread, and she's fixing it as she goes. She broke it back down to the point where it's even, and now she's just going to tie an overhand knot
Oh, yeah, okay. Huh?
and not overthink it.
I've done that. Or you've done that.
No, estoy haciendo al revés.
And now what do we do with it? It's on its way to becoming a textile. In order to weave, you have to have your warp. And the warp are the threads that run the length of the textile. The weft is the one that you weave. That's the over-under-over-unders, and then the under-over-under-overs. Right, so you weave warp speed ahead and from right to weft. So that's how you can remember warp and weft. Before you can start weaving, you have to set up your warp. That all gets set up all at once, and it's tricky. So you have to be able to set that up carefully. And when I warp for weaving on my loom, I have a warping board. It has a bunch of pegs on it, and I can follow the path back and forth across all the pegs, and I can do that by myself. But I didn't see anybody warping by themselves. Everybody warped at least with one partner, and they would sit at opposite ends of the warp, and the distance would be the length of the textile that they were setting up. And they would throw the balls back and forth and then wrap them around, tie it to the header cord, and then throw the ball. And it just, again, re-emphasized these are activities done in community. It's done with people, with a friend, with a helper, with a kid who's learning.
So warping is pretty much always done as a team. Some people will do it by themselves, but it's pretty much always done as a team because you need somebody at each end who is able to perform the tensioning and the lashing of stuff, and that has to be done in conjunction with making sure that the cross is correct in order to do this. So this is just warping it, and then there is some additional configuration here in this community that is done to set up for different structures of weaving. So as you can see, they're putting in a header cord, which is going to be used for lashing to the loom parts. So every time they go around, they do that.
Does that have the crisscross as well?
Yeah. Yeah. If you come over closer, you see it has to have a cross.
And then it's time to weave. I have to say about the weaving, it's so important to understand this. None of this is written down. When I say unbroken tradition, it's an oral tradition. It's a tactile words. Oh my goodness. It's a tactile, practiced tradition. When children are like 6 years old, they start weaving, and they weave narrow bands with a simple motif, and they all start with the same motif. It's called Chinchero. It has little X's and O's running down it, and we got some one-on-one instruction, which was amazing. And so we got some Chinchero bands started. I was actually able to level up to the next weaving motif, and so that was really special. People have to do this. They have to practice this to learn it, to understand it. If you just write it down, you can look at the page, but the important thing becomes the page. And that's not actually the important thing in this Andean tradition. The people are the important thing. And we kept laughing to ourselves because we are grown adult people and here we are doing something that the people teaching us, they've been doing since they were 6 years old. At the same time, they were really excited to have people coming in who were from, different traditions, different backgrounds, but wanted to learn about their traditions and their textiles, to understand the work that goes into it, the time, the practice. It's like when you finish knitting a sweater and it's like you can't just tell anybody about it because they're going to be like, oh, why didn't you just buy one? Why would you spend all that time? But then you talk to a knitter and they're like, wow, that's gorgeous. Look at your increases. Your color work is perfection. They get it. They know those details. And so, again, that connection that transcends culture and language. How excited they were for us to come in and learn and value and appreciate their work and their traditions and their textiles. And that was really cool. So I carefully made several purchases. Once you start learning about these textiles and you start to see Chinchero in all the different places, you start to understand, oh, this is a manta that came from Chinchero. These are the colors and the motif and the organization of the way it is that they do in Chinchero. And so anybody who is familiar with this tradition can look at this manta and say, oh yeah, that's Chinchero. I know where that came from, or at least the weaver that wove it. I know where they're from. And so once you start to notice and recognize the little details, you start to see them everywhere. It's like its own language. It's like, Andean weavers put the text in textile because you can read their textiles and know where someone's from, where they learned to weave, what community they're part of. The whole concept of overconsumption of textiles, it just sounds so ridiculous when you've spent time in a place that puts so much effort into their textiles. I can't imagine throwing away a hand-spun, hand-woven, hand-dyed manta to get whatever the new one is next year that looks nothing like the other one because it's a new fashion and it's a new trend and it's a new cycle, and now we can't even tell which community one came from because the Walmarts in every town sell the same stuff. Walking around the markets looking at things being sold to tourists, it's interesting to see how trends are impacting the tourist market. Things that tourists are interested in are not necessarily the same things that exist in this unbroken textile tradition, but people have to make a living and they have to put food on their tables. And so if switching things up to become something that's more desirable by tourists puts money in your pocket, why wouldn't you? And so it's interesting to see how just because something is unbroken doesn't mean it's unchanged. And, cultures have exchange and they adapt, they incorporate new ideas. One example of this that I thought it was so fascinating, if you're familiar with amigurumi, it is a Japanese technique of crochet to make little stuffed animals. This is a yama, and it's amigurumi, but it's a yama, and it's made from sheep's wool. I added the pom-poms. I'm calling it Perumagumi, and I love it so much. I was able to get 2 vintage textiles. I'll grab those and show you those real quick. Here's the first one. This is a vintage, it's a manta or a blanket. It probably is dyed with regular schmegular old chemical dyes. This is not probably natural dye. And I thought it was really interesting to compare this to a different manta that I got that I'll show you in just a second. I think it's interesting to look at the range of qualities and techniques. And I mean, they're both backstrap woven, I'm sure. But anyway, just noticing differences. I find that to be very interesting. And so the other thing that was interesting was how many in the tourist market, how many bags. If you want a bag, go to PSOC, go to the market because they have bags. Let me tell you, muchas bolsas. The bags are made from upcycled vintage ponchos. This was someone's old poncho, and now it's my bag. And now here is a brand new manta that I got at CTTC in Chinchero, and this manta is a very traditional Chinchero, the colors, the patterns, and yet every weaver, it makes it unique. They're not exactly uniform, even though they are the same in their colors and their patterns. And that is so cool. I love that. I think that's a really cool thing. So if I wear this in the Sacred Valley and Cusco and, any of those places, and people from that area see me, they're going to be like, oh, she got that in Chinchero. This one is hand spun as well. Women use those mantas to keep warm, to carry stuff, including children, to sit on when they're weaving so they don't have to sit on the ground. Those large rectangles of fabric are immensely useful and I mean ubiquitous. I saw so many women walking around with those just tied around their shoulders. And honestly, it looked way more comfortable than the wrap I used for my kids when I was doing baby wearing. So if you're a new mom and you've got babies and you want to do baby wrapping, baby wearing, I recommend looking into how they do it in Peru because it was super efficient.
Okay, I want one. Ya, Chem, tápame. Cuando duerme, se tapa así. Oh, that's cute. And then for breastfeeding. And then when you're going to breastfeed. Para dar el pecho. Aquí. Por aquí. Very convenient. You just swing it over. This is how I carried my kid around. I want that.
I had a wrap, but it was in the front.
And it was just more complicated.
And way more complicated. This would have been so much simpler. If you notice on both of the mantas, the blankets that I have, you'll notice that they are stitched down the center. There's a center seam. And not only is there a seam there, but that seam is not hidden. It's like, oh, let's put some pretty thread here. Because everything about those textiles is beautiful. But anyway, that seam is there because you can only weave so wide on a backstrap loom. The wider and wider you get, the more complex, but also the more difficult it is to keep an even tension, to have an even beat. That's where some of the weavers will use those alpaca bones to make sure everything is really tucked in there, nice and firm. Because these textiles are meant to be used, but I don't want to use them in a way that could make them dirty. I'm working on it. I am working on it. I did put it on the floor and sit on it. So I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I also loved how many animal motifs appeared in the different woven pieces, and so I got a couple pieces that had specifically some animals in them because I love it. I got this one from Susie because my first weaving teacher when I was learning Chinchero, and she also helped with the dye day, and she appears in quite a few of the pictures and people going around doing stuff. So I was really glad to get something from Susie and to support her. This runner is a little bit smaller. It also has animal motifs, but it is in the natural colors of alpaca. I think my favorite animal on this one is the little goat. He's adorable. Followed closely by his alpaca friend. Those were all the big main pieces that I got. I got, some more bands and some hand knit items and various things, but I won't bore you with all of that. This has been quite a video, but I've really appreciated having this to pause, take a moment, and really reflect on the things that I learned while I was there. If you know of any good color work that would be a fun way to use the natural dyed yarns that I have, I would love to hear your recommendations. I am absolutely going to practice and finish the woven bands that I've started working on, and I really look forward to that. I'm enjoying it so much, and I also look forward to doing some, Baltic pickup and seeing how learning this particular style from the people in the Andes, how it makes sense, how it's relevant or not when I do other different kinds of weaving that I also enjoy doing, like card weaving, tablet weaving. How is this experience going to affect the way I think about those tablets? Because I guarantee you that, back in the year 800, 700, whatever, little Norse children were not picking up a book of patterns to learn how to weave. The tablets turning, the rotation of them, the setup of them, the order of them, everyone had that in their mind. Like, amazing. People, humans, we have such capacity for creativity. It's really incredible. One of my favorite takeaways from this whole experience is that fiber friends are fiber friends everywhere around the world. And it doesn't matter if you started spinning when you were 6 years old or 50 years old. It doesn't matter, because even if you are a master spinner in the Andes, or if you are a United States tourist to the Andes, there is a universal experience that we have all had, that we all relate to, and that is dropping your spindle.
We laugh because it's so relatable.
Yeah. So relatable. Very relatable.
Thank you very much to Foreo for sponsoring this video. Go check out that link, and especially that Black Friday sale coming up. I will see you all in the next one. Happy spinning!
So I want to talk about what it takes to have 60 spinners and 48 weavers all spin and weave to the exact same standard so that it can all be put together and work through and so forth. So from the point when the official kickoff of the final weaving project began to when the actual thing was complete was about 10 months, but there were more than 2 years in the planning and meeting about it and strategizing and trying to do the math to figure out like how many kilos of wool, how many kilos of what kind of dye, what the process would be, who had to spin what amount of yarn in which month, all that kind of stuff. It was really a very impressive process.
Weavers, we spent like 2 years, no? And so it's made with 48 weavers, best weavers.
Okay.
If you don't like that piece, give it to me. I'll eat the rest of it. Eat the crunchy piece.
It doesn't taste bad. In fact, it tastes really good. But my brain is too active about it. Like I'm thinking too much about it. That's just a not used to it thing though. That's all that is. I'm good. I did it. I documented it. I tasted it. Yay me.